we want to have a voice in that. So, my 12-year-old might come back from a friend's house and say, Barack Obama's a liar. And so like he heard that, maybe from the kid's dad or whatever it is. And so, what I will try to do is just engage him in a conversation. Okay, well, why do you think that? How'd that come up? What was the context? Whatever. And then once you can get at the thing that was actually said, you can say, well, let's go look at something about this. Let's research this. What do you base that on? Because one of my things, particularly with my older son, is I don't want him going out there and spouting off stuff where he doesn't know what he's talking about, and where he can't back it up with anything, and it's just unadulterated opinion that he got from someone or some person. But going more into the whole terrorism thing and like, do we insulate them? Do we, that's hard because we like to create a safe world for our kids, and we like to sort of be the one who protects, and the dad puts the walls around that world, and at least in the little world we create for them, nothing too bad can happen. But we also do want them to be cognizant of the world out there and not go out feeling like, it's just a playground, because there are real things that they have to confront. For me, it's kind of just it's a factor of age. I mean, again, my 12-year-old knows that I was in New York on 9/11, and we've talked about that, and he's read the piece that I wrote about that. My 8-year-old, not so much, I mean, a little bit of that, but I'll let someone else talk. But that's kind of those are my initial thoughts on it.
I'll offer something, Chris. I mean, you mentioned, and I'll share the same story too. There was a period of time where I kind of avoided listening to the news for its negative input and all the things I was trying to do to stay positive and healthy. But somebody said something once to me that really resonated with me, and it's that, when you don't know what's going on, then those opportunities for you to do something about it, you don't know. So a critical part of staying connected, whether you like it or what you don't like it, I mean, the negative things in life just remind you there's opportunity, that maybe there's something that you do really well that could have a perspective here. And for us not to know it, then just shortchanges ourselves, and it shortchanges our world, where we may be one of the voices charged, to find a solution. And I think that's a healthy way of seeing it with our kids. And I'd love to find out what the rest of the council thinks. But one of the things I'd offer is, how do we make the conversation about what's true so that the kids always know it's fair to talk about what's true, or at least what they hear, so that it can be debriefed, it can be challenged, you can be educated around it, so that, like Thomas, like you said, so the kids don't spout up all this wrong information by hearing the loudest voice, and the loudest voice says, I hate Barack Obama, or Muslims are terrorists, or these blanket statements that sometimes come out to the world out of rage or ignorance. Then what we can do is start to debrief it, and in the process show our kids a process of verifying what's true and what's not true, and guide them into having their own perspective, up to and including asking them, so what could you do about this? Maybe it's not for you to solve, but maybe you have an opinion, and maybe that opinion you should write, you should share. Maybe that opinion could be the thing that the world hasn't heard yet, and maybe it's you who's supposed to say it.
I like what you're saying there, Jay. And I was thinking about this whole process, and that's why I put this quote. I don't know how well you can read it, but I'll read it to you. And it's by Zig Ziglar, and it really this is my perspective and how I feel about what we see on the news, and it's kind of that thought becoming things. So I'll read it. The way you see your future determines your thinking today. Your thinking today determines your performance today, and your performance in the todays of your life determine your future. So in that quote, I think, for me at least, as we're watching TV and we have the news giving us this perspective of something that's going on in the world, and then now we're going to our peers and our whoever's, and oh man, did you see what's going on over in Paris, or did you see what's going on in the Middle East or in Russia, and all these things, right? as we start to focus on that in our lives, it becomes the major conversation. And so that starts to form our thinking. Now, if you look at TV, you've got all these shows on doomsday preppers, and they're waiting for the world to end, and all of this like just negative thought process. And it's like it's starting to form certain, or it's starting to manifest in different forms in our society, and that scares me.
I think that's right, Chris. And sort of going back to an example with my kids. I mean, we'll go see my mom. We go visit her 3 or 4 times a year, and she likes to have the radio on. She's 90, so she likes to listen to the radio and NPR. And at night, she likes to turn on the news, like the local Chicago news. And of course, it always starts with a murder or some horrible thing. And when my kids and I are there, I will say to her, you know what? We do not want to watch this. I don't want this kind of negativity coming in. It's just it's just going to saturate them with the idea that that's what the world is about. So please, can we do something else? But the flip side of that, sort of going back to what Jay said too, is that there are, if you can kind of pause that cycle for a little while, and you can take an event like ISIS or like what happened in Paris and try to help put it in a context for your kids and have a discussion about it, then I think that can be really valuable. I mean, the attacks in Paris really present a great opportunity to talk about freedom of speech, to talk about religious tolerance, to talk about all sorts of things that really matter for kids. And so you could say, like, well, we don't have to like what this magazine said about the Prophet Muhammad. Nobody has to like that. Nobody has to agree with that. But they do have the right to publish it, and they do have the right to say it, and they certainly have the right not to get killed for saying it. So, you can find their speech objectionable, but we live in a country where freedom of speech is protected, and kind of take it in that direction, depending upon the maturity of the child.
Mm-hmm. Did you have something, Tommy?
Well, I mean, to Thomas's point about freedom of speech, 10 years of my life I worked in radio, so freedom of speech was very important to me. And it's funny that I recently had a talk with my son about freedom of speech, because we took a trip recently, the family, up to the mountains, and I knew that their favorite radio stations were going to fade away, so I put a CD together of music they liked, music that my wife and I liked, and a couple of songs did have bad, naughty words. So I had a conversation with my son. I said, why is it okay for these music artists to be able to use these words, but as a parent, we don't want you to use those words? And so that's where we got on the subject of by Thomas, of freedom of speech, because I think it's vital that kids now take a step back. I said to my wife this morning, about this topic. I said, "Have your daughters talked to you about ISIS? Have they talked to you about Paris? I mean, heck, here in Denver, Colorado, we had a bombing not too long ago, just a week ago. Those are things that the kids, they're in their own little world, and so." I guess this topic really kind of befuddles me, because none of our kids have come up to us and said, "Hey, tell us more about Paris. What do you think?" It's I guess maybe if in Jay's case, you have older daughters, you've got older kids, and so they're probably more attuned to things like this than the rest of us that have younger kids that don't hate me on this one, Eric, but my kid is at home, when I'm on the phone with him, he's playing Xbox, but he's playing hockey, okay, and basketball. None of those violent games.
Well, Tommy, I think, what you bring, I don't know that it's the age of the kid, and I think it's our responsibility as parents to bring up things in today's world to see where our kids are with them. And if they're not paying attention, maybe it's right that we ask them to pay attention. I mean, that's what's going on in their world, and they should know what's going on in their world. And
Why?
it isn't to bring that, why? Because it affects things that will affect their life. And it's fair to have a discussion around, what is free speech, and when you don't agree with somebody who says something, why do you have the right to kill them? I mean, or what is what's the range of right reactions? So if you have a sister and a brother don't get along and somebody hits the other one, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. You said something I didn't like, so I retaliated. That's what happened in Paris. So, I mean, there's a family event in every one of these that I think, okay, guys, here's what's going on the macro level. If we were to bring that home, where's the lesson? What do you need to know to be successful and safe and wise in this? And me personally, though I think it's right that we have free speech, I think it's also right that we understand we don't master all of the words on the planet, and we could be at least a little tolerant to people who don't see the world the way that we do. Because sometimes we have to be gentle with our siblings and not say things to antagonize them, even if it's right that I have the ability to say it. But it's about managing myself well enough to know I'm not the only person on the planet. And so, I mean, I think all of that could come out of this. I'd still like us to talk about how do we talk to our kids about extreme behavior, but I also think we're talking about how do you just talk about behavior, and all of these, I think Thomas, I think you said at the beginning, part of it we want to shield our kids. Maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe inform our kids, walk with them, guide them, hear them, show them what we see. Maybe prepares them in a better way than just, hey, try and stay away from all this bad stuff. Because I think there's a lot of lessons in the bad stuff that they could learn and therefore not have to be part of the bad stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim, and I think the shielding is sort of like, you don't want your kids to be, or particularly little kids to be having nightmares, about stuff. But I completely agree with you. I mean, when I was maybe, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10 or so. My older brother, he's 15 years older than I am, he was concerned that I was not really taking an interest in or sort of following any news or current events. So he set this thing up where he would quiz me every day on the newspaper. He'd say, I'm going to ask you about one article, I'm going to ask you about one photograph, and I'm going to ask you about one comic. And so, but it got me in the habit of reading the newspaper every day, and taking a look at it. And so, going sort of to those habits is, we do want our kids to be able to make decisions about the world from a place of information. And in fact, to learn that decisions are things that you have to make from a place of information.
Nicely said. Yeah.
A decision is not an emotional reaction to something. A decision is you take in some information about something and you process it and you think it through, and then you come back with a response as to what you think about it. So yeah, these are teaching moments, and extremists are people who either make decisions or react in a way that is coming from probably a highly emotional and irrational place.
I think something for, as Jay, kind of hitting on both your guys' points. I grew up in the early 90s. My dad moved to Italy, so I went to Italy for the summer and then during Christmas. And one of the things that kind of comes into play when we're talking about things that are going on around the world is that different countries have different rules and regulations compared to what we have here in the United States. So when I was in Italy, I had to be real careful on bringing up the term mafia because that was very big. And close to the end of my dad's living there, there was a bunch of government officials and stuff that got arrested for being part of organized crime, and then all of these bombings were happening. The police station that was 2 buildings over from my dad's apartment was blown up. Bridges blown up with political people driving across them. All these things were happening because all of these political people were getting arrested for their involvement with the mafia. So something was going on that we didn't really know exactly what was going on behind the scenes because of the culture there. The culture was, the mafia has, as I think most of us know, that the Italian mafia. You watch your Godfather movies and stuff like that. That goes back to, there's a history there, and so when you're in these other countries, you have to understand that there are different value systems or ways of living that are different from what we have here in the United States. And being over there and spending those 6 years over there, every summer and stuff, I got to really appreciate some of the stuff that we do get in the United States. But at the same time, there were some things I'm like, well, they have the freedom to do all these other things that we don't quite have the freedoms to do. But yet, there was just a difference there, and it was about understanding those differences.
Yeah, that's a great point, and because there are some things, there's some aspects of social conduct and things that are much freer in Europe, but then there are freedoms that they don't have. But you're talking about Italy reminds me of that scene from The Godfather. I think it's from Godfather 2, where they go to maybe it's 1. I don't remember where they're in Italy. He's in Italy and he's in Corleone, and they're walking around, and he says, "Where are all the men?" And the guy says, "Vendettas," because all the men are dead.
Right.
You see these women in black walking around, and there are no men left in this town because they've all gotten angry with each other and killed each other.
Yep. And I mean, my stepmom was had a tutor teaching her English, and she was gorgeous. Like the thought, beautiful Italian woman image. This was this girl or woman, and she was dating a guy who was tied in with the wrong people or whatever over there, and she tried to break things off with him. And a couple months later, she had told my stepmom she was afraid and all these things.
Right.
And a couple months later, she had jumped off the balcony of her building.
Wow.
So, a lot of things happened right. I mean, like I said, that police station, 2 buildings down, blown up. That it was all over the place. My dad wasn't in the military, so a lot of times if you're there in the military, you're living in the military base, in the military, you don't get to actually get engulfed in the culture. And he was in the robotics industry, so he's there for the automotive industry. So he actually lived in the Italian world. Yeah, like he was completely engulfed in it. So it's a different lifestyle.
Well, think about how our schools handle it when either there's some incident at the school or there's some kind of major tragic event, in the community or something like that. The schools open up a forum, they offer counseling to the kids, they say, let's talk about this. You've got feelings about this. You're going to have a response to this, whether you're even sort of aware of it or not. And so maybe as parents we can, the schools obviously don't get everything right, but as parents we can look to that as the model, so this thing happened, and you probably know about it, or you're going to hear about it, or your friends are going to talk about it, or whatever. So let's get on that base first and talk about it and help them process it, so that they have some guidance.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, well, thanks. I guess what's so interesting about this conversation is that we all have different perspectives, and Chris, when you were sharing early on that like you don't take in too much news, and I'm in a similar place, and as well, I also remember what happened when Sandy Hook happened, and I took it upon myself to share that with my kids immediately because I had been listening to the news when it was happening. For some reason I don't normally listen to the news, but I actually wanted them to hear from me first. I just felt like it was important that if someone was going to share something of this, because I was visibly sad. I was just like, I had no idea, like I don't know how to hide my emotions that well. So I was just, rather than have them ask me why I'm sad, I just, proactively, shared that with them. But for the most part, I mean, like, what happens in France, we get to decide as parents how that, how the questions around that, and what is information, I mean, like, I would keep on talking about, like, our textbooks, and when we were taught history, like, Columbus was awesome, right? Like, I mean, and my kids tell me a different story about, like, the historical figures that I read about, and I thought, Columbus is awesome. He, like, gave us this country, and and then they're privy to a set of information that that I wasn't when I was being taught. So I think the question is, what is information, is so valid here, because when we choose to protect our kids or to inform our kids, we now know that, like, Fox is kind of slanted in one way and CBS in another and NBC in another. So I mean, like, what is information? I mean, it all seems to be subjective and relative. So I feel like that's where our main challenge as parents is we can say, oh, well, if you watch that news from Fox, you might think Obama's awful, So information is no longer this, like, fact-based stuff anymore.
Right.
So, except for the fact that there are now more people dead in Paris than were a few days ago.
Right, the speed at which information travels is so different, because of the internet, because Wikipedia is updated 5 seconds after something happens, and yeah, history gets revisited. I mean, you know about the term Columbusing? Have you heard that?
I have not.
Columbusing means when someone comes in and appropriates the thing that someone else did. So, Columbus didn't really discover America, but he Columbused it. He from the Scandinavians, whoever got here, from the Native Americans who were really already here. So but that's become a term. So, like, if you discover a bar and then a friend of yours says, "Oh, I discovered this great bar," you're Columbusing me.
I mean, could you also be Al Goring?
Yes, you could.
Would that be, Eric, you mean making up things that are just not really yours? Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, like, all I heard was, like, Al Gore saying, "I invented the internet,"
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the thing in about all of this, and that's the reason why I think, Tommy, the comment I had before is, how do you not stop the kids from seeing this stuff? And Eric, I love that comment that you made that said, look, when this tragedy of Sandy Hook happened, I wanted them to hear it from me first. There are some things we're supposed to be the buffer and the explainer, I think. And many other times we're just the ear and the pointed question that says, so tell me what you heard today. And if we could help our kids break away from the thing that keeps them so connected to a lot of opinions, which are not necessarily fact, then we could have that conversation that says, of what you've heard today, what mattered? What registered? What got you upset? What made you happy? What something, that allowed us to have a conversation around what it is that the world told you today. Now, what do you want to do with what it told you? Is there something for you? Is there something to stay away from? Is there something dangerous? Is there something fun? Did you get introduced to a country you had no idea where Burkina Faso was, and now you do? And I don't know what you're seeing, and wouldn't it be cool if I, at least for part of your life, ask you what you see so we can debrief it? And just say, look, the world is going to tell you things. Tell me what it tells you. And based on my experiences, maybe I can offer some things on whether I think that's true. And if it's not what I know, maybe the right answer is, let's go check that. My grandfather drove me nuts when we were kids, but he was really right. He's a big language guy, and anytime he'd use a word that we didn't know, and we'd give him, that face that says, I don't really know what you're talking about, he would grab us by the hand and pull us to a dictionary and said, let's sit and talk about this. And okay, I remember as a kid, why do I have to do this? But in retrospect, it's one of my happiest memories of the guy saying, it's important for you to know it's your world. You can't make decisions if your head's in the sand. That doesn't mean you're always going to like what's there, but you can process what's there if you know it.
Right.
You can't process if you don't know it. So what is it that you could then learn, and how would you stay in touch? The one last thing I'll share, and then I promise to pass it on, is so in teaching my course on entrepreneurship, the kids at the college, the thing I had them do was notice something that they hadn't noticed before on their way into class, whether it was good or bad, and then talk about where's the opportunity. Now, this was framed on how do you see business opportunities? How do you get good at becoming an opportunity hunter? Well, we can do the same thing with our kids. What did you see and what did it tell you? One, you noticed. That's what I really want you to do. Stop going through life not noticing. You have to notice. You notice people around you. You notice people who are in bands who shouldn't be near you. You notice things. All this stuff happens when you develop the skill of noticing. And once you become aware of that, then the information that shows up in that moment then becomes available to you. Then you can challenge it. Was that information or just somebody's perspective? Or is it truly information, and therefore this is now what's true? What do I want to do next? And that process is Chris will tell you, this is what we teach over and over again. If you could be aware and mindful enough to notice things in the moment, then in the next moment you'd have enough information to say, what do I do? And that process seems to be entirely missing in this next generation. That notice, decide, then do something.
It is, and that's teaching people how to think, really, how to take information, how to relate it to something that they already know or have learned, or have in their lexicon, and then make a conscious decision about it.
Intention.
Related to that, I want to tell just a short, funny story about my son. I write for this local online news site, and we went out last year and we tried to sell some ads to some of the local restaurants and places. And so I said to him, there are three things that you really need to know about sales. And one is that you have to establish a relationship with your potential client. Then once you've established the relationship, you find out what the need is. And then the third thing is no means not now. So you really have to be persistent, because when they're saying no, you think, well, okay, they don't want it now, but you're gonna, you keep that relationship going and you persist. So he immediately turned no means not now on me.
You as a dad, yeah.
So when you say no, I know what that means. And yes, I got owned, but I was really proud of him in this, because he took that piece of information and then he processed it through sort of the filter of what his own life is with me, and he said, all right, now I've got something that I can use.
That's awesome.
Yeah, be careful what you tell them, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like all this stuff is amazing, and just getting back to our kids as teachers, I mean, it's highly likely that we are going to get some of our information as to what's going on in the world from our kids, and that's just going to be the reality, and we're going to be part of the teachable moment, and I feel like that's, I was just remembering back to my 8th grade year, and remembering in history class or whatever it was called, I had a New York Times test, so I needed to read the front page of the New York Times and then like 10 paragraphs of the follow-up articles, and then we'd be quizzed on it Monday morning. And I was just recounting with a friend of mine that I was so grateful that my kids aren't getting that social studies teacher, because I don't want them exposed to that much ridiculous news right now. And I know I'm calling it ridiculous because I don't want it through somebody else's filter, and I'm not sure I want that much I don't know. It's a very interesting conversation, because our kids are amazing teachers and they're going to be getting stuff that we never got, and I love it when they they turn our teachings on us. I love it when when I hear no means not now being used on me, and like having them recall it. I love that. And it's a beautiful process. But I guess I'm just in the zone where I want to be intentional about learning more from my kids than I actually teach them. So and that's what I think 2015 is really starting out to be for me. So
I think it's really hard, Eric, with the news, and this goes back to Chris's initial point about sort of avoiding the news, is that 20 years ago or whatever, there was a news story, but that and yes, the newspapers had the compulsion and the TV networks to have some comment on a developing story right away. But I think everybody recognized this is a developing story. We don't have all the answers about it. We're going to say what we know for sure.
Yeah.
We're going to hold off on saying anything else until we've kind of had a chance to look at this and process it. So you might get the full story tomorrow. You might get the fuller story, on a Sunday when you read a longer article in the newspaper. You might get an even fuller story when you read a long form piece in a magazine. And it's so different now, where everybody's competing to have the entire story within 5 seconds of it hitting Twitter, and so you get all of this opinion and you get all of this wrong information, and then it's still, the time frame is the same. It's still a week or whatever it is before we actually know what really happened, and so.
Well, what was that news channel that got in trouble for that airplane crash? And they were like, listing names of the people, and it was like these ridiculous
Well, you see that over and over again, where they predict a winner, and they've already published who a winner is in some political race when, a third of the precincts are in, and they've already done this just based on supposition, and they've printed it, and they're already saying it, and none of it's true. It's just, maybe if they would just preface it by, here's what I've got right now, comma, and then the rest of us would say, cool, that means the story's not complete yet. Great, change the channel. There's nothing else to hear here until you have something that's a little bit more accurate or more complete.
Jay, that's a great phrase. Here's what we've got right now. So maybe that could be like the lead-in to the discussion of a news story with a child. Here's what we've got right now. Here's what's going on right now. Here's what we know, and maybe we're not going to form a full opinion on this right away because
not ready. Not ready.
We're really not in, and that's what we want to teach them to do is to take the information in, to say, all right, you've got a gut reaction to it. Maybe that's correct, but maybe that's based on something that isn't necessarily accurate. But we want to kind of take a little bit more time with this.
Can I shift this a little bit too? Because I think the other part of this, and I love that we went right for information. How are we helping our kids, be discerning about what information is out there so they can make meaningful decisions? But what brought? How do we talk to our kids about what brought people to that level of behavior in the first place? And I know there's a lesson in there, and I wonder if that's part of today's lesson or today's conversation. One story I'll share is my oldest daughter. I have 3 daughters. So my oldest daughter, there was a period of time when she was probably like 9, 10, and 11, where when she would get upset, her first reaction was to hit one of her sisters. I have no idea where it came from. They shouldn't see it at home. We're not like that. We didn't spank the kids. I don't know where she got that. But we used to say to her, keep that up or we're going to have to visit you on Sundays when somebody locks you up because somebody did something to you out in the world and you went and used that response instead of how do I talk myself through, how do I understand my emotions, how do I control this? Thank goodness she's not that kid anymore, but what is it that we need, or what kind of conversation creates extreme behaviors or the lack of respect for someone else or the lack of self-control that, and I'm throwing all these out and I don't even know which is the right one, so grab it and run with any of them. Or is it that where is there some temperance and some patience about sharing the space with other people and therefore they're different than you? There's got to be a way of understanding, what is reasonable behavior and what isn't.
I think, Jay, there are 2 factors that stand out to me from what you just said. One in terms of where it comes from is indoctrination, is people being taught consistently from very early childhood that so-and-so is the enemy, that so-and-so is bad, that so-and-so must be attacked, exterminated, or whatever. So that could be one aspect that factors into the conversation, is that these extremists from a very, very early age, like we know that snakes or poisonous snakes are bad or whatever. So some people have been taught that a Muslim or a Christian or whatever is like a poisonous snake, and so you see it, you have to take action. But the other thing is helping people understand a really important distinction between outrage and rage. You can feel outrage. You can say, this is absolutely ridiculous, this thing that happened. I'm so mad about it. I'm so upset about this. But when that outrage becomes actual rage, that's where I think we need to draw the line as a civilized society.
Eric, this is so got your name written all over it.
Well, it does and it doesn't, because I feel like one of the things that I love being sort of a teacher on with my kids, if I do take on a teacher role, is to tell them what they can do with their own anger. And basically, I tell them, like, anger is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with being angry. There's something wrong with acting, with that, or making decisions from a place of anger. So I would tell them, like, when I was a kid and I got angry, I would go and split wood. So I feel like, one of and it's really interesting, because I get it spiritually. I know that we're we have a collective soul, and all these different kind of pockets are exploding, with collective anger, and so are they ready to hear that, explanation for things? Probably not. But I think they're ready to know that if they can deal with their anger, and find a true release for it, rather than storing it up, and instead of saying, we just don't hit, like, you can't just tell your kids no without giving them a constructive way to express that anger, Right. So I'm like, don't hit your brother, but you can go scream into a pillow or split wood. And I mean, I'll just share, like, one of the best stories I remember as a parent, just witnessing, is that, my daughter, I guess she was 8 at the time, she came home from school, and she was somewhat upset about whatever had happened at school, and then she got into some little snit with her brother. And then it was the most adorable thing, because she goes into the snit, and then she turns around and walks out of the house, storms out of the house, and then, like, my gut said, just trust it, don't follow after her. And then I looked out the back room window, the kitchen window, and there she was, splitting wood. And I was just like, that's just, I mean, we basically said, like, it's not for you to do unsupervised. So, like, I eventually walked out and, helped guide her wood splitting, expression of her anger. But it was perfect. I was just like, yay, I mean, that's what kids, can do once they're taught, about how to constructively release their anger. And, I mean, I warm up inside when I remember that story, because I'm like, wow, and instead of having her just, like, go to town, like, hitting her brother, she just turned around and just split wood, and it was hysterical. And she might not even remember that, but I just remember her immediately applying a new tool.
Wow. Well, so, Eric, that's because you gave her a toolbox of ways to deal with that. And so the problem with the extremists is they don't have a toolbox of how to deal with their outrage. They only know one way to deal with it. One of the things that I believe about dealing with kids who are having tantrums and meltdowns is, comfort first, and then you can deal with whatever the consequences. But you have to get the child stabilized, so your kid might need a hug or might need to, calm down. Let's just, okay. So now we can, once the tears stop flowing and all that, we can sort of deal with it. But nobody deals with these extremists in that way. They haven't been not just parented, but socialized in a way that would enable them to go out and split wood or have that kind of positive response as opposed to what they actually do.
So you say they need a hug, is what you're saying?
Not exactly.
Well, I'll say
yes,
they
in
do,
a way, Jay, yes.
I feel like, and I think that's the other opportunity here is that, we think that these extremists have like crossed the line so far that we can't find a pathway to forgiveness or hugging them. But I feel like, I think that's so true, Jay. Like, they do need a hug. They need thousands of hugs. They need millions of hugs, and and there's a rewiring of our collective heart that is possible. I mean, I was just online for lunch today with and bumped into a friend of mine, or kind of an acquaintance. I'm like, what are you up to? And she turned around. And she's like, Eric, I'm starting a cuddling business. And she was dead serious. And I'm like, wow, like, and I like in an instant I got it. I'm just like totally, in full support. Yes, this country needs more cuddling, pronto, stat, and I was like, and it's fringe, I mean, only in Ithaca, right? But not, so, but it was just like, it was a really interesting moment where I'm like, okay, cool, yeah. People need more hugs. People need more cuddling, and there is a huge void right now. I mean, there is research that says like people need at least 2 quality hugs per day in order to just like be healthy, and kind of stable beings. And I know what my day is like when I don't get 2 quality hugs. I know what it was like to go to like Florida for a whole week and then come home and not see my kids right away. I was starving for like hugs. And so like so anyway, I just feel it's a stretch. I know it's a stretch for many of us, but like these extremists need more hugs. I'll say it. I don't know if I'm the first to say it, but like I'll truly say that.
So Tom, let me share something. I was listening to Fresh Air yesterday, and Terry Gross was talking to, I'm not going to get his name right, but the site is Quilliam, Quilliam, and this was a guy who was a Islamic extremist, was put in prison for a number of years, and has now started an organization that it counters that, trying to help people understand what is the thinking in that. And the only reason I bring it up is that I think we as a world are starting to get to a point where, a little bit of compassion to say, if somebody is that mad and would do these kind of things, what is it that's going on that maybe we could have a talk about? Maybe that's what the hug means, so maybe a hug becomes, Eric, someday an acronym for hurry up and, I don't know, catch me off cold here, I don't know what it is, but
right.
whatever it is, but it's an acronym or something that says somebody is calling out for help. What is that?
Yeah,
you were talking about this earlier, Jay. I'm sorry, I want to jump in.
Go.
Okay. You were talking about how we show up, how we choose to show up to the world, all right, as individuals. And I think that's a lot to do. I dealt with anger when it came with my kids, and I responded all the time. Or, I'm sorry, I reacted all the time. And I've learned to respond. So, when I would get, my kids would be getting on my nerves, and I'd hold it in, and then, it just came out in anger. And one of the things I had to learn is start to recognize that initial feeling of, okay, what they're doing right now is really, getting at me. It's starting to bother me. What is it about what they're doing that it is that's bothering me? And then, so that's where a lot of that self-work kind of comes into play. And I just wonder how, as a country, we could be that example for those other countries. Because I don't think we've done a good job of that to this point. And I followed Ron Paul a few years back, and he talked a lot about what was going on in the Middle East. Had a lot to do with blowback from things that we did in the 80s and 90s. So, that we went and we gave these people these weapons and we taught them, these certain things, and we had this, and now we're getting the repercussions for what we did back then.
Yeah, Al-Qaeda used to be called the Mujahideen, and they were the Afghan freedom fighters, and we were giving them all sorts of weapons because they were fighting the Soviets and kicking the Soviets out of Afghanistan, and there was this whole freedom force there, and then when the Soviets pulled out, and we pulled out all the support, basically you had these group of people left with all all this military material and nothing to do with it.
Right.
Well, here's the challenge. When we use the words in tandem, freedom fighters.
Yeah.
My adopted dad has dog tags from serving in the Navy, and I'll paraphrase, but they basically said fighting for peace is like screwing for virginity. So I feel like it's really important to just check our energy, and like even our history is not right, and like Einstein is one of my biggest inspirations in that the social challenges of today cannot be solved by the thinking that created them. So like we can look at history all we want and find all of the sources of all the wrong answers because they're still fighting today. Why? Because we're using the thinking of yesterday to try to solve the fighting of today. And so what we need to do, I believe, what we get to do is what Mother Teresa would do. She would never go to an anti-war rally. She would go to a demonstration for peace every day.
But think of the power of that lesson. So just in the conversation about this, what would this next generation hear from us if we talked about it this way, instead of just allowed our kids to hear what the news was saying? And it's not that we have to do every event this way, but how might they get comfortable checking in with us about what our bigger or broader perspective might be in it, and how might we hold on to the requirement that we don't just vocalize back the loudest soundbite we just heard without doing some of our own work. That, so what is true about this? Before I just say, yeah, based on what I heard on the radio, here's what's going on. Global warming is this, or pick the thing. The current Congress doesn't get anything done. Okay, well that one's true, but but so it so that it stays away from the heavily opinionated things, but rather that we're always trying to set the stage that our job is to decipher what's true and what's not true, and from the biggest or best truth we can find, because sometimes we won't find the truth, but we have the most news that we can at the moment, that we use it to be intentional, like Thomas was talking about, that we don't go ahead and choose to do something until we've done enough of our own work to say what's true and what's not true. And going to Google as the absolute source on things, or Wikipedia, isn't. And we talk to most anybody who's 12 years old to 35, and that's their go-to source. If it's there, it's true. No, if it's there, it's printed. If it's there, it's written, but it doesn't mean it's true. So check in on the sources and then decide based on your own belief system and your own value system what's true for you. And to me, I think that just sets up the ability for us to arm our kids knowing that it has to be their own internal moral compass that guides them instead of the loudest voices around them.
That's right, Jay, and the critical piece of that is giving our kids the space to express those opinions. If we want them to check in with us about stuff, we have to allow for them to say something, and we have to allow for that something to be different, even from what we think. So, going back to the original thing I said, if your kid comes in and he's, Barack Obama's a liar, he's the worst president that ever was, rather than just coming back at your child, no, Obama's a great president, and getting into a debate about that, and then the next time your kid's not going to come with something because you're just arguing in his face or whatever. Right. So, you have to give some space. Oh, that's interesting. Where did you hear it? What do you base it on? And kind of let it rise up and then enter into a discussion about it that allows, for a difference of opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that's the other evolution of what fatherhood is, or what parenting is that,
Oh, yeah.
Parenting 20, 30 years ago meant a sharing of value orientation. We had the next generation of kids, and then we taught them how to be, how to grow up a Lehman, and how that was different than growing up a 40, and it was just very important that we continued some sort of family values, from our lineage, and that was our belief in carrying our name forward as well. I mean, now parenting is so very different. It's a conversation rather than an instruction, and I still think it's an opportunity to learn more than we actually teach. And I think that word teaching is my new inquiry. Is there something better, for that word? Because I just want to learn from my kids. I want to be present with them. And what does it mean to be present for them, with them? And on top of that, how am I modeling the behavior that I would love for them to emulate, rather than 20 years ago it was sort of do as I say, not as I do. We don't hit. So
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
you don't hit, but I reserve the right to hit whatever I want.
Right.
Parental right, yeah.
Well, it kind of goes into the "cause I said so"
Yeah.
thing too, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know how many times I use that on my kids. Why do I have to do that? Because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
Deal with it.
Tommy, can I ask Tommy a question? So, I think most of us, the rest of the four of us, we get to deal with our own kids. What's it like when you have to have these conversations in a blended family where this isn't your kid? It's your kid by marriage. So do they listen to you the way we would expect our kids would listen to us as their dad? How does that change for you, or is this just a non-issue? Either when you talk about, hey, go get information, or let's talk about really tough stuff, do your stepkids, your bonus kids, open up to you about stuff like that?
That's a great question, Jay. The older one, Betsy, should be 18 next week. That's a big no. She just has, she has the relationship between her and her dad is, a very special one, the two of them. The younger one, Becca, her and her dad don't have a great relationship, so she kind of relies on me more. Last Christmas, this was a great conversation at Christmas, we got on the subject about Snapchat, and I had just read an article about these kids think that with Snapchat, once they think it's deleted, they think it's gone, but it's not, because that data, that information is going through several different servers that are storing that information. So I said to Betsy, I said, just make sure you're not sending out stupid, messages out there. And she went off on me. And, God bless my wife, because she knows that Betsy and I are very similar, and that is we will butt heads. And I just got to the point where I had to walk away, because when we do have those serious conversations, it's hard, because I'm coming from, a parenting point of view, but Betsy doesn't see me essentially as a parent. She just sees me as some idiot just walking around the house. And so she, again, because she has such a strong bond with her dad, whatever I say, it's like, the whole Charlie Brown thing. As an adult, wah, 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 wah. With Becca, she'll listen. We've had some pretty good conversations, because her and my son, there's about a year apart, so I can relate to both of them better than I can with a teenager. So, yeah, those serious conversations, Jay, when they do happen, it's very uncomfortable for both of us.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all part of, we've got an adjusted family, but we still have, the parent as the guide and I mean, how do we keep that going? Our situations aren't as tough. We can say, look, you're our kid, you have to listen to me. And I imagine it's very complicated when the kids say, I don't want to have to talk to you about that. And you might be concerned with, then who are you talking to about that? Because
Right.
you still need a parental source. And I'm not sure where you're going from information, and I care about you, though I understand it's complicated because, I got you because of your mother rather than I got you because, I decided to have you. I just wondered, how that complicates it, and just to give a voice to the fact that there's yet one more level of complexity about that.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, I was in a little different situation because I was raising my ex's twins, but their dad wasn't around, so I was in essence the dad. So I didn't have like this competing authoritative figure or whatever you'd call it coming from. They didn't have anybody else to go to for that guidance. So it was a little different, a little more unique. But we are hitting our time. This conversation is awesome. I think that we even got a new topic set for next week. We're kind of diving into that already. So thank you all for being on. This was awesome. I think we got a lot of food for thought here. So we'll see y'all next week.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Cool.
Bye.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.